The year was 2347, and humanity had finally earned its place among the stars. After 200 years of space travel, humans had built colonies on 17 worlds across 3 solar systems. They had developed faster-than-light engines, powerful weapons, and a military force that protected their growing empire. But in the eyes of the Galactic Council, humans were still children playing dangerous games. The Galactic Council was a governing body made up of 12 ancient alien species. These species had traveled between stars for thousands of years before humans even learned to make fire. They watched humanity's rapid expansion with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Humans were loud, emotional, and aggressive. They bred quickly and spread even quicker. The Council had seen species like this before, and they always caused problems. Admiral Catherine Novak stood on the bridge of the warship Resolute, watching the stars drift past on the main view screen. She was 52 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines on her face that told stories of battles fought and won. She had joined the United Earth Navy at 18 and had spent her entire adult life in service to humanity. Now she commanded the 4th Fleet. One of the most powerful military forces humans had ever assembled, Catherine was not alone in her position of power. 9 other women held critical command positions throughout the fleet. Commander Lisa Greer ran tactical operations aboard the battleship Ironclad. Captain Maria Santos commanded the frigate Daybreak and was known for her bold attack strategies. Lieutenant Commander Diane Murray coordinated communications for the entire 4th Fleet from her station on the carrier. Valiant Captain Angela Price piloted the stealth cruiser Silent Dawn, a ship so advanced that enemy sensors could not detect it until it was too late. Commander Patricia Lane served as chief engineer on the orbital station Horizon, keeping the massive structure running smoothly. Captain Ruth Morrison led 2,000 Marines aboard the carrier Valiant, training them for ground combat on alien worlds. Commander Heather Cole worked as intelligence officer for Earth Command, gathering secrets from across the galaxy. Lieutenant Commander Nicole Page managed supply lines that kept food, fuel, and ammunition flowing to the outer colonies. And Captain Stephanie Burke commanded the research vessel Discovery, exploring unknown regions of space and cataloging new phenomena. These 10 women were the backbone of human military power in the region. They had earned their positions through skill, courage, and years of dedicated service. Their crews respected them. Their enemies feared them. And the Galactic Council had been watching them very carefully. On the 42nd day of standard rotation, something strange happened aboard the Resolute. The lights on the bridge flickered for just a moment. A low hum filled the air, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then a blinding flash of white light filled the room, so bright that everyone had to cover their eyes. When the light faded, Admiral Novak was gone. Her command chair sat empty. The crew looked around in confusion and fear, but their commander had simply vanished into thin air. The same thing happened on 9 other ships at exactly the same moment. Commander Greer disappeared from the Ironclad. Captain Santos vanished from the Daybreak. Across the fleet, across hundreds of thousands of kilometers of space, 10 women were taken in the blink of an eye. Lieutenant Commander Gregory Hayes was the senior officer remaining on the Resolute. His hands shook as he activated the emergency beacon and sent out a distress call. Within minutes, responses came flooding in from other ships. The Ironclad reported Commander Greer missing. The Daybreak reported Captain Santos gone, one by one. The terrible truth became clear. All 10 women commanders had been taken. Rescue teams searched every ship from top to bottom. They scanned for hidden compartments, checked the airlocks, reviewed the security recordings. The recordings showed the same thing on every vessel. A flash of light, and then nothing. No intruders. No ships approaching. Just light. Gatameza. Ambassador Victor Dunn was eating dinner in his quarters on Earth when the emergency message arrived. He was a thin man with tired eyes who had spent 15 years trying to build peaceful relationships between humanity and the Council species. He believed in diplomacy, in patience, in showing the galaxy that humans could be trusted. The message came directly from the Galactic Council headquarters, transmitted through official diplomatic channels. Victor read it 3 times, hoping he had misunderstood, hoping the translation software had made an error. The 10 human females had been taken into protective custody. Their aggressive tendencies pose a threat to galactic stability. They will be re-educated in accordance with Council protocols. Humanity is advised to accept this action as a corrective measure for their own benefit. No further communication on this matter will be entertained. Victor set down his fork and stared at the wall. His mind raced through the implications of what he had just read. The Council had kidnapped 10 human military commanders. They had violated human sovereignty, stolen people from their ships, and expected humanity to simply accept it. He thought about Catherine Novak, whom he had met several times at diplomatic functions. She was brilliant and dedicated, a woman who had devoted her life to protecting her people. He thought about the other commanders, about their families, about the crews who served under them. He thought about how humanity would react. Victor had spent his career trying to prevent war between humans and the Council. He had argued for understanding, for compromise, for finding common ground with alien species who saw the universe very differently than humans did. He had believed that patience and goodwill could overcome any obstacle. But this was different. The Council had not just insulted humanity or passed unfair trade regulations. They had taken human citizens by force. They had kidnapped military officers from their own ships, and they had done it with the arrogance of someone who believed they would face no consequences. Victor picked up his communication device and contacted Earth Command. His voice was steady as he delivered the news, even though his heart was pounding in his chest. "The Council has taken our people," he said. "They expect us to do nothing. They are wrong." Across human space, the news spread like wildfire. Families learned that their mothers, sisters, daughters, and wives had been stolen by alien forces. Soldiers learned that their commanders had been taken right out from under their protection. Citizens watched the broadcast with growing anger, unable to believe what they were hearing. The Council had miscalculated badly. They had expected humans to be afraid, to back down, to accept their punishment quietly. They did not understand what they had awakened. In homes and barracks and ships throughout human territory, people began to talk about war, not as a distant possibility, not as something to be avoided at all costs, but as a necessity. The Council had drawn a line. They had put themselves on the wrong side of it. Catherine Novak had always taught her crew that there were some things worth fighting for. She believed that protecting the innocent was worth any sacrifice. She believed that standing up to bullies was the only way to stop them. Now, humanity would have the chance to prove whether they believed the same thing. The stars continued to shine, cold and distant, as the galaxy moved toward a conflict that would change everything. On 12 alien worlds, Council leaders celebrated their bold action against the troublesome humans. They did not know that their celebration would be short-lived. Humanity was coming, and they would bring fire with them. President Daniel Crawford had not slept in 2 days. Dark circles hung under his eyes, and his usually neat gray hair was messy from running his hands through it too many times. He sat at the head of a long table in the most secure room on Earth, surrounded by the most powerful people in human civilization. The War Council had been meeting for 18 hours straight. Empty coffee cups littered the table. Half-eaten sandwiches sat forgotten on plates. The air was thick with tension and the smell of stress. Fleet Admiral George Patterson sat to the president's right. He was 70 years old, the oldest serving officer in the United Earth Navy. His white hair was cut short, and his blue eyes were hard as steel. He had fought in 3 major conflicts during his career and had never lost a battle. Now he faced the greatest challenge of his life. Secretary of Defense Margaret Ellis sat across from the Admiral, scrolling through data on her tablet. She was a practical woman who dealt in numbers and projections. Her job was to tell the president what was possible and what was not. Right now, her numbers painted a grim picture. General Howard Blake of the Marine Corps leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed. He was a large man with broad shoulders and hands that looked like they could crush stone. His Marines had a reputation for being the toughest fighters in human space, and Blake himself was known for never backing down from a challenge. Around the table sat a dozen other officials, admirals, generals, intelligence directors, and political advisors. They had been arguing since the moment they sat down. They were no closer to agreement than when they started. President Crawford raised his hand for silence. The room fell quiet immediately. "We have heard the arguments for diplomacy," he said, his voice rough from exhaustion. "We have heard the arguments for war. Before we make our decision, I want to hear are from someone who has a personal stake in this matter." He nodded toward a man sitting at the far end of the table. Colonel Samuel Novak was retired now, his military days behind him. He had silver hair and a face weathered by decades of service. He was also Admiral Catherine Novak's husband. Samuel had been invited to the council as a courtesy. He had listened to the debates without speaking, his face showing no emotion. But when the president called on him, something shifted in his eyes. He stood slowly, pushing back his chair. Every person in the room turned to look at him. "My wife dedicated her life to protecting humanity," Samuel said. His voice was quiet but clear. "She missed birthdays and anniversaries. She was gone for months at a time. She sacrificed everything for the people she served." He paused, looking around the table at each face in turn. "Catherine always told me that there are moments when you have to decide what kind of person you want to be. She said that fear is natural, but letting fear control your decisions is a choice. She believed that standing up for what is right matters more than staying safe." Samuel placed his hands flat on the table and leaned forward. "The council took my wife. They took 9 other women who gave everything for humanity. They did it because they believed we would be too afraid to stop them." His voice hardened. "If we prove them right, if we abandon our people because we fear the consequences, then we deserve whatever the council does to us next. Catherine would never forgive us for starting a war in her name. But she would also never forgive us for being cowards." He sat back down and said nothing more. The room remained silent for a long moment. Admiral Patterson was the first to speak. "The colonel is right," he said. "This is not just about 10 officers. This is about whether humanity will stand up for itself or kneel to those who would treat us as lesser beings." Secretary Ellis shook her head. "I understand the emotion here, but we need to consider the facts. The council has 12 member species. Their combined military is 3 times the size of ours. Their technology is more advanced in many areas. If we go to war, we could lose everything." General Blake laughed, a short and harsh sound. "With respect, Madam Secretary, your numbers do not account for something important. Those 12 species have never fought together. They have different command structures, different tactics, different goals. They are a coalition held together by convenience, not loyalty." He leaned forward, his eyes bright with intensity. "Humans are different. When we fight as one. We do not argue about who gives orders or who gets credit. We just win." The debate continued for another hour, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Samuel Novak's words had shifted something in the room. The officials who had argued for caution began to change their positions. The military leaders who had wanted war found more support for their views. Finally, President Crawford called for a vote. One by one, the council members stated their position. When the count was finished, the result was clear. War President Crawford picked up a document that had been prepared hours earlier. His staff had known this moment might come, and they had wanted to be ready. The document was a formal declaration of war against the Galactic Council and all its member species. The President. Read the key passage aloud. "The United Earth Government hereby declares that a state of war exists between humanity and the Galactic Council. This action is taken in response to the unlawful abduction of 10 human military officers. All diplomatic relations are severed. All council vessels in human space must withdraw within 24 hours or be considered hostile combatants." He signed the document with a pen that had belonged to his grandfather, a man who had fought in the last great war on Earth itself. "Send the declaration to every human colony," Crawford ordered. "Broadcast it on all frequencies. Make sure the council hears it clearly." Admiral Patterson stood and saluted. "It will be done, Mr. President. I will have the fleet ready to move within 6 hours." General Blake cracked his knuckles. "My Marines have been waiting for this. The council will learn what happens when you take our people." Secretary Ellis closed her tablet and sighed. I hope we know what we are doing. The cost of this war will be measured in lives. President Crawford nodded gravely. I know, and I will carry that weight for the rest of my days. But some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are against us. The council members filed out of the room to begin their preparations. Within hours, the entire human military machine would shift into war mode. Ships would be fueled and armed. Soldiers would receive their orders. Factories would begin producing weapons and supplies at maximum capacity. Samuel Novak remained seated as the room emptied. President Crawford walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. We will bring her home, Colonel. I promise you that. Samuel looked up at the president with eyes that held both hope and fear. Just make sure it means something. Make sure their sacrifice, whatever happens, is not wasted. Crawford nodded. That is exactly what I intend to do. The news of the declaration spread across human space within the hour. On colony worlds and space stations and ships and homes, people heard the announcement and understood that everything had changed. Some were afraid. Some were angry. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. The Council had made a terrible mistake. In the headquarters of the Galactic Council, 12 alien leaders received the human declaration with disbelief. They had expected protests, complaints, perhaps some minor military posturing. They had not expected humanity to actually declare war against the entire galactic order. One of the council members, a Velthari elder named Sareth, spoke the thought that was on everyone's mind. They cannot be serious. They are one species against 12. This is madness. But deep down, Sareth felt something he had not experienced in centuries. It was a small, cold feeling in the pit of his stomach. It was the beginning of fear, the first battle of the war. Happened at the Proxima checkpoint, a small space station on the border between human territory and council space. A patrol fleet of 5 council ships had been stationed there for years, watching human traffic and reporting any suspicious activity. When the war declaration came, they refused to leave. Captain Dennis Harper commanded the destroyer Thunderbolt. He was a young officer, only 34 years old, the reputation for following orders exactly and never hesitating in a fight. When the council ships ignored his warning to withdraw, did not ask twice, the Thunderbolt opened fire at precisely 0600 hours on the first day of the war. 2 human frigates and a cruiser followed moments later. The council ships tried to return fire, but they were old vessels with outdated weapons, stationed at a quiet border post because nobody expected trouble. The battle lasted 11 minutes. 6 council ships were destroyed. 2 human ships suffered damage but remained operational. There were no survivors from the enemy fleet. Captain Harper reported the engagement to Earth, command with a simple message: Proxima checkpoint secured. Enemy resistance eliminated. Awaiting further orders. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light. Humans had fired the first shots. Humans had won the first battle. The war was no longer theoretical. It was real. Admiral Patterson coordinated the campaign from Earth Command, a massive underground facility built into a mountain range. Screens covered every wall, showing ship positions, supply lines, and enemy movements. Hundreds of officers worked at stations throughout the complex, processing information and relaying orders. The Admiral's strategy was simple but effective. Human ships would secure every border crossing and defensive position in their own territory first. Once those positions were safe, they would begin pushing into council space, targeting supply depots, communication relays, and shipyards. Cannot fight a defensive war against 12 species, Patterson explained to his staff. If we sit back and let them attack us, they will eventually overwhelm us with numbers. Our only chance is to be aggressive, to keep them off balance, to make them react to us, instead of the other way around. The council species struggled to respond. 12 different military commanders argued about strategy, resources, and priorities. The Karathi wanted to launch an immediate ground invasion of human colonies. The Velthari preferred economic sanctions and blockades. The Mendari suggested waiting to see if humans would accept a negotiated settlement. While they argued, human ships struck at 3 different council outposts in a single day. A supply convoy was destroyed near Mendari space. A communication relay was disabled in the Velthari system. A patrol fleet was ambushed and scattered in Karathi territory. The council finally agreed on a response. They would invade the human colony world of New Brisbane. It was a farming colony with a small population and minimal defenses. The Karathi, who had pushed hardest for the invasion, volunteered to lead the attack. 15,000 Karathi soldiers boarded transport ships and headed for human space. They did not know that Colonel Denise Murphy was waiting for them. Denise Murphy was 46 years old and had been a Marine for 25 years. She had fought in border skirmishes, pirate raids, and one particularly nasty rebellion on a mining colony. She had scars on her arms and legs from battles that most people had never heard of. When the war started, she was stationed on New Brisbane with a single battalion of 800 Marines. She had 3 weeks to prepare before the Karathi arrived. Denise used every minute of that time. She organized the colonists into militia units and taught them basic combat skills. She identified defensive positions throughout the colony and fortified them with whatever materials were available. She set traps, dug trenches, and positioned her Marines at key choke points. "The Karathi think this will be easy," she told her troops on the night before the invasion. "They think we are soft farmers who will surrender at the first sign of trouble. We are going to prove them wrong." Karathi landed at dawn, their transport ships descending through the clouds like metal rain. They expected minimal resistance. They expected to capture the colony within a day. They encountered their first ambush. Before they even reached the main settlement, Marine snipers hidden in the tree line opened fire on the Karathi column. Explosions tore through their formation as hidden mines detonated under their feet. The Karathi soldiers, confused and angry, charged toward the source of the attacks. They found nothing but empty positions and more traps. This pattern repeated itself for 3 weeks. Every time the Karathi advanced, they ran into another ambush. Every time they tried to rest, human raiders attacked their camps. Every time they thought they had cornered the defenders, the humans melted away and struck somewhere else. Colonel Murphy led from the front, moving between defensive positions and directing her troops personally. She was wounded twice but refused evacuation. Her Marines followed her example, fighting with a ferocity that shocked the Karathi commanders. The Battle of New Brisbane ended when the surviving Karathi soldiers retreated to their transport ships and fled back to council space. Of the 15,000 soldiers who had landed, fewer than 2,000 made it home. Human losses were heavy too, over 200 Marines and militia killed. But the colony remained in human hands. Colonel Murphy stood among the wreckage of the colonial administrative building, watching the last Karathi ships disappear into the sky. A medic tried to bandage the wound on her forehead, but she pushed his hands away. "Send a message to the council," she told her communications officer. "Tell them that every world they try to take will cost them the same. Tell them we are just getting started."
Ow.
While the battle raged on New Brisbane, the 10 captured commanders remained in council custody. They had been separated and sent to detention facilities on different worlds. Held in isolated cells designed to break their spirits, Admiral Catherine Novak was imprisoned on the Velthary homeworld, a planet of endless forests and ancient cities. Her cell was comfortable by Velthary standards, a small room with a bed, a table, and a window that looked out on the alien landscape. The guards brought her food and water, but did not speak to her. Catherine spent her first week studying everything she could about her captors. She watched the guards, learning their routines and patterns. She listened to the sounds of the facility, mapping its layout in her mind. She exercised every day, keeping her body strong and her mind sharp. On the 8th day, she discovered that she was not alone. The Velthary had placed other prisoners in the facility, including a young human pilot named Lieutenant Andrew Green, who had been captured during a reconnaissance mission. Catherine found a way to communicate with Andrew through the ventilation system. They tapped messages in Morse code, sharing information about the facility and discussing possible escape plans. "The other commanders are out there somewhere," Catherine told him. "We need to find a way to contact them. If we can coordinate our efforts, we have a chance." Andrew was skeptical. "We are deep in council territory, Admiral. Even if we escape, How do we get home? Catherine smiled, even though no one could see her. One problem at a time, Lieutenant. First we get out of these cells, then we figure out the rest. She began planning, reaching out to other prisoners, building a network of allies who were willing to risk everything for freedom. The Velthari guards watched her with confusion, unable to understand why this human female refused to accept her fate. They did not know that Catherine Novak had never accepted defeat in her entire life, and she was not about to start now, far away. On Earth and throughout human space, people followed the news of the war with hope and fear. The victory at New Brisbane had lifted spirits, but everyone knew that harder battles were coming. The Council had more ships, more soldiers, more resources. Humanity was fighting against impossible odds, but humans had always fought against impossible odds. And sometimes, against all expectations, they won. 6 months into the war, the Galactic Council was falling apart. What had seemed like an easy victory against a single troublesome species had turned into a nightmare. Human ships appeared where they were not expected, struck hard, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Human soldiers fought with a ferocity that terrified even the battle-hardened Karathi. And worst of all, the Council's unity was crumbling. The Mendari were the first to break. They were an amphibian species who lived on water worlds and had joined the Council centuries ago for protection against their aggressive neighbors. They had never wanted this war, and when human raiders destroyed their primary shipyard, they decided they had suffered enough. Ambassador Daleth of the Mendari contacted Earth through secret channels. His message was simple. The Mendari would withdraw from the war if humanity agreed to leave their territory alone. President Crawford accepted the offer within hours. The Sindari followed soon after. They were insectoid beings who valued efficiency above all else. Their calculations showed that the war was costing more than any possible benefit. Fighting humanity made no logical sense when negotiation was possible. They too began secret talks with Earth. Admiral Patterson exploited every crack in the Council's alliance. He sent diplomatic teams to species who seemed hesitant, offering trade agreements and mutual defense pacts to those who would break from the coalition. At the same time, he authorized increasingly bold military operations. Commander Eric Dunn was the son of Ambassador Victor Dunn. He had grown up watching his father work for peace with the Council, believing that diplomacy was the answer to every problem. The kidnapping of the commanders had changed his mind. Eric commanded the cruiser Relentless, one of the fastest and most powerful ships in the human fleet. Admiral Patterson gave him a special mission: lead a strike force deep into Council territory and hit a target that would shake the enemy to their core. The target was the Orbital Assembly, a massive space station where Council leaders gathered to coordinate their war effort. It was located in the heart of Council space, protected by defensive platforms and patrol fleets. Nobody had ever attacked it directly. Eric assembled his strike force in secret. 3 cruisers, 5 destroyers, and 2 troop transports carrying 500 Marines. They made the jump to faster-than-light travel from a remote location where Council sensors could not detect them. The journey took 2 weeks. Eric used the time to review plans with his officers and prepare his crews for the most dangerous mission of their lives. Everyone knew that getting in would be difficult. Getting out might be impossible. The strike force emerged from faster-than-light, travel less than 1,000 kilometers from the orbital assembly. The Council defenders were caught completely off guard. Before they could organize a response, human ships had disabled the defensive platforms and cleared a path to the station. Marine boarding pods launched from the transports and slammed into 3 docking bays on the station. Within minutes, 500 heavily armed humans were moving through the corridors of the most secure facility in Council space. Eric's orders were specific. This was not a mission to destroy the station. It was a mission to send a message. The Marines planted explosive charges throughout the structure, placing them in visible locations where Council engineers would easily find them. They did not detonate the charges. Instead, they left them in place with a message attached to each one. We could have destroyed you. We chose not to. Release our people, and this war ends. Continue to hold them, and next time we will not be so merciful. The Marines withdrew to their ships. The strike force made the jump back to human space before Council reinforcements could arrive. They had been in enemy territory for less than 4 hours. The effect on Council morale was devastating. Their most secure facility had been violated. Their leaders had been shown to be vulnerable. Arguments erupted among the member species, each blaming the others for the security failure. High Counselor Veth of the Sindari addressed the emergency. Meeting with cold logic, the humans have demonstrated that they can strike anywhere. Continuing this war achieves nothing except more destruction. I recommend we begin negotiations for the release of the prisoners. The Karathi representative slammed his fist on the table. You would surrender to these animals? They are inferior beings who should be taught their place. Their place appears to be inside our most secure installations, Veth replied. Perhaps we should reconsider who is inferior to whom. On the Velthari homeworld, Admiral Catherine Novak heard about the attack on the orbital assembly through the prison communication network. She allowed herself a moment of pride, imagining the panic that must have swept through the council chambers. Then she returned to the work that had occupied her for months. The escape plan was finally ready. Catherine had spent half a year building a network of allies among the prisoners. She had communicated with the other captured commanders through coded messages smuggled between facilities. Each woman had gathered intelligence about her own prison, identified weaknesses and security, and prepared her fellow inmates for action. They had chosen a date, the 1-year anniversary of their capture. It would be a moment of symbolic importance, and more practically, it would be a day when many guards would be distracted by commemorative ceremonies. On the Velthari world, Catherine's plan went into motion at dawn. She had befriended a Karathi prisoner named Groth, who knew the facility layout better than the guards themselves. Together with Lieutenant Andrew Green and a dozen other prisoners, they overpowered the morning shift guards and seized control of the communications center. From there, Catherine transmitted a signal to the other detention facilities. The signal was simple, a series of tones that meant only one thing: begin, across council space. The other commanders launched their own revolts. Captain Maria Santos led an uprising on a Mendari prison world, using improvised weapons to overwhelm the guards. Commander Lisa Greer escaped from a Karathi facility with the help of sympathetic local workers who opposed the war. Captain Ruth Morrison broke out of a high-security prison by starting a riot that drew guards away from critical checkpoints. 7 of the 10 commanders escaped successfully. Captain Angela Price was killed during her breakout attempt when guards opened fire on fleeing prisoners. Commander Heather Colt died when her stolen transport ship was destroyed by a patrol vessel. Lieutenant Commander Diane Murray was recaptured after her escape vehicle crashed on an uninhabited moon. Catherine mourned her fallen comrades. She had known Angela for 20 years. Heather had served under her command on 3 different ships. Diane had been one of the most talented communications officers in the fleet. Their deaths left wounds that would never fully heal, but grief could wait. Catherine had work to do. She commandeered a Velthari transport vessel and gathered the other escaped commanders aboard. They plotted a course for human space, using back routes and hiding spots that Ketzian had memorized during her time in captivity. The journey home took 3 weeks. During that time, Catherine compiled all the intelligence she had gathered about council operations: troop movements, supply routes, defensive weaknesses, political divisions, information that would prove invaluable in the months to come. When the transport ship finally crossed into human territory, a patrol cruiser intercepted them immediately. Catherine identified herself and requested escort to Earth Command. The cruiser captain's voice crackled over the communication system, thick with emotion. Admiral Novak, it is an honor to escort you home. The entire fleet has been waiting for this moment. Catherine looked at the other commanders gathered around her. They were tired, scarred, and changed by their ordeal. But they were alive, and they were free. Tell Admiral Patterson that we have intelligence that will help end this war, Catherine said. And tell my husband that I am coming home. The transport ship turned toward Earth, surrounded by escort vessels that had appeared from all directions. Word spread across the fleet, then across all of human space. The commanders were coming home. On colony worlds and space stations, people celebrated in the streets. The women who had been taken, the women who had refused to break, were finally returning. It felt like the beginning of the end, like the moment when the tide of the war had truly turned. And in the chambers of the Galactic Council, the remaining leaders watched the news with growing desperation. They had taken humanity's commanders and expected submission. Instead, they had created heroes. The war was not over yet, but everyone could feel that something had changed. The war did not end with a single great battle. It ended with a slow collapse, like a building crumbling piece by piece, until nothing was left standing. The Galactic Council, which had ruled the stars for thousands of years, fell apart over the course of 8 months. The Sindari were the first to sign a separate peace treaty with humanity. They calculated that continued fighting would cost them more than any possible gain. And they had never been enthusiastic about the war in the first place. Within weeks, the Mendari followed. Then the Thraxi. Then the Varani. Then for other species who decided that their alliance with the Council was not worth dying for, the Velthari tried to hold the coalition together. High Elder Sereth gave speeches about duty and honor, about the importance of presenting a united front against human aggression. But his words fell on ears that no longer wanted to listen. Species that had been rivals for centuries saw no reason to sacrifice their own people for a war that was already lost. The Karathi held out the longest. They were a proud warrior species who had never surrendered to anyone. Their leaders declared that they would fight to the last soldier, rather than accept defeat at the hands of inferior beings. Admiral Catherine Novak led the campaign against them. She had been promoted to Supreme Commander of the Combined Fleet. Upon her return to Earth, President Crawford had wanted to give her time to rest, to recover from her ordeal, but Catherine had refused. There would be time for rest when the war was over. The intelligence she had gathered during her captivity proved invaluable. She knew the locations of Karathi supply depots, the routes their convoys traveled, the weaknesses in their defensive networks. Human ships struck at these targets with surgical precision, cutting off resources and isolating Karathi forces. The final battle took place in the Karathi home system. Catherine commanded a fleet of 200 ships, the largest human force ever assembled. Facing her was the remnant of the Karathi military, 60 vessels defending their homeworld with desperate courage. Catherine opened a communication. Channel to the Karathi command ship. This is Admiral Novak of the United Earth Fleet. Your allies have abandoned you. Your supply lines are cut. You cannot win this battle. I am offering you one chance to surrender with honor. The Karathi Admiral's response was a stream of insults and threats. His species did not surrender. They would die fighting before they accepted the shame of defeat. Catherine had expected this answer. Very well, but know that I take no pleasure in what comes next.
Ow!
The battle lasted 6 hours. Human ships surrounded the Karathi fleet and attacked from all directions, overwhelming their defenses with superior numbers and firepower. One by one, the Karathi vessels were disabled or destroyed. When the fighting finally ended, only 3 enemy ships remained operational. Catherine ordered her forces to stand down. She approached the Karathi flagship in a shuttle, accompanied only by 2 guards. The Karathi admiral met her in his ruined command center, surrounded by the bodies of his fallen crew. "You have one," he said, his voice flat with exhaustion. "Kill me if you wish. I will not beg for my life." Catherine looked at the alien warrior, seeing the pride and pain in his eyes. "I did not come here to kill you. I came to offer peace." The surrender ceremony took place the following week on neutral ground, a space station that had been designated as a meeting point for negotiations. Representatives from all 12 council species attended, along with President Crawford and the surviving human commanders. The terms of the treaty were harsh but fair. The council was required to formally recognize human sovereignty over their current territory and any systems they had captured during the war. Reparations would be paid for the abduction of the commanders and for the deaths of Captain Angela Price, Commander Heather Cole, and Lieutenant Commander Diane Murray. The council would be restructured to give smaller species, including humanity, a meaningful voice in decisions. In exchange, humanity agreed to withdraw from occupied territories that had been captured during the war. They would participate in the new governance structure and work toward peaceful coexistence with former enemies. There would be no punishment for individual soldiers or civilians who had followed orders during the conflict. President Crawford signed the treaty with the same pen his grandfather had used to sign documents during the last war on Earth. It seemed fitting, somehow, to connect this moment with that earlier struggle. This war was not something we wanted, Crawford said in his address to the gathered representatives. It was something that was forced upon us when you took our people. We hope that today marks the beginning of a new relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than fear. High Elder Sarith of the Velthiri responded on behalf of the council. His voice was quiet, carrying none of the arrogance that had characterized council communications before the war. We underestimated your species. We believed that taking your commanders would frighten you into submission. Instead, it united you against us. We have learned a painful lesson about the consequences of our actions. The ceremony ended, and the dignitaries returned to their respective territories. The war was officially over. Catherine Novak did not attend the celebration on Earth that night. Instead, she went home to the small house she shared with her husband. The house she had not seen in nearly 2 years. Samuel was waiting for her when she arrived. He looked older than she remembered, with more gray in his hair and deeper lines on his face. But his eyes were the same, filled with the love that had sustained them through decades of separation and hardship. They held each other for a long time without speaking. Words seemed unnecessary after everything they had been through. Finally, Catherine pulled back and looked at her husband. "I am tired, Sam. So tired." He smiled gently. "Then rest. The universe can manage without you for a while." She laughed, the first real laugh she had allowed herself in months. "I suppose it will have to." The days and weeks that followed were filled with adjustments. The human military reduced its operations to peacetime levels. Soldiers returned home to families who had waited and worried. Ships that had been weapons of war were converted for exploration and commerce. Colonel L. Denise Murphy retired from the Marine Corps with full honors. General Howard Blake took over training the next generation of soldiers. Admiral Patterson, who had coordinated the entire war effort from Earth's command, finally allowed himself to take a vacation. The surviving commanders each found their own path forward. Captain Maria Santos took command of a deep space exploration mission, seeking new worlds beyond the territories that humanity already claimed. Commander Lisa Greer became the director of Earth Command's tactical training program. Captain Ruth Morrison wrote a book about her experiences during the war. A book that became required reading at military academies across human space. Ambassador Victor Dunn, who had spent so many years building bridges with the Council, found new purpose in the reformed galactic governance structure. He worked to establish trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and scientific partnerships with former enemies. It was slow, difficult work, but he believed it was worth doing. The galaxy had changed. Species that had once dismissed humanity as aggressive children now treated them with respect, and in some cases, with fear. The war had proven that humans would pay any price to protect their own. It was a lesson that nobody would forget. Catherine Novak stood on the bridge of the Resolute one last time. The ship had been rebuilt after the war, updated with new systems and weapons. It gleamed in the starlight, a symbol of everything humanity had fought for. She decided to retire. The war had taken more from her than she could icily calculate, and she wanted to spend whatever years remained with the people she loved. But before she left, she wanted to address her crew one final time. "We did not seek this war," she said, her voice carrying across the silent bridge. "We did not want it. But when the Council took our people, when they tried to break us, we showed them what humanity is made of." She paused, looking at the faces of the men and women who had served under her command. "Remember what we learned? Remember that we are strongest when we stand together. Remember that there are some things worth fighting for, even when the cost is high. And remember the ones who did not come home, the ones who gave everything so that the rest of us could be free." The crew saluted as she walked off the bridge for the last time. Behind her, The stars continued to shine. The same stars that had witnessed humanity's greatest challenge and greatest triumph. The war was over, but the story of humanity among the stars was just beginning. Samuel was waiting for her at the shuttle bay. He took her hand as they walked toward their transport, toward the future they would build together. "What now?" he asked. Catherine looked out at the stars one last time. "Now we live." That is what all of this was for, after all. The chance to live. The shuttle doors closed, and Catherine Novak went home,